The Pax Concordia drifted in space, a glittering testament to neutrality hovering above the contested Kepler nexus. Captain Dylan Fletcher gazed through the vast observation window, his reflection superimposed over the distant lights of two massive fleets, crystalline structures of the Zephyrians twinkling like disco balls on one side, the undulating bioorganic vessels of the Vraxians pulsing with subdued bioluminescence on the other. 473 years, Lieutenant Commander Alex Reeves said, sliding a datapad across the table. That's how long they've been at this. Can you imagine? Earth's gone from pre-industrial to interstellar, while these folks have been having the same argument. Fletcher picked up the pad, scrolling through battle statistics with a practiced eye. And now they want us to, what exactly? Be impartial observers? Seems like they've been doing fine without us. Actually, sir, Reeves said, her dark eyes serious beneath her close-cropped hair. They've specifically requested a human mediator. Your reputation precedes you. Fletcher snorted. My reputation for cutting through bureaucratic nonsense. You mean, your reputation, Reeves corrected with a half-smile, for solving disputes human style, as they put it. Apparently, we have quite the galactic reputation for being blunt problem solvers. Fletcher's retort was cut short by the station's announcement system. Captain Fletcher, Lieutenant Commander Reeves, your presence is requested in the Grand Conciliation Chamber. The ambassadors have arrived. The chamber lived up to its name. A vast, circular room with a domed ceiling, displaying a real-time holographic representation of the surrounding space. At its center stood a round table carved from some pearlescent material that seemed to glow from within. The Zephyrian ambassador entered first, light refracting through his crystalline exoskeleton in prismatic patterns that danced across the walls. His formal translation unit rendered his vibrations into a pleasant tenor. Captain Fletcher, what an honor. I am Senior Harmonic Resonator, Zilthrax Tirvain of the 7th Facet. He extended a crystalline appendage. But you may call me Steve. We find human names more manageable. Fletcher shook the surprisingly warm appendage. Pleased to meet you, Steve. The door opposite hissed open, revealing the Vraxian ambassador. Unlike the angular, gem-like Zephyrian, the Vraxian moved like living liquid, her bio-armor shifting in iridescent patterns of greens and blues. Tendrils extended from what might be called a head, constantly sampling the air. I am Nutrient, Exchange Coordinator, Blackstorblatt View, 4th Sensory Cluster. Her voice emerged from a specialized organ that vibrated with each syllable. My associates call me Bob. Fewer pheromone markers for you to misinterpret. Fletcher exchanged a glance with Reeves, who kept her expression professionally neutral, despite the absurdity. Well then, Fletcher said, gesturing to the table. Shall we get started? I understand you've been at war for quite some time. Steve and Bob took positions at opposite sides of the table, their postures mirroring each other in a way that suggested long familiarity. 473 years, 2 months, 6 days. Standard time, Steve said. And approximately 14 hours, Bob added. Fletcher settled into his chair, leaning forward with his elbows on the table. And you've invited humans to, what? Help you continue fighting. Steve's crystalline structure refracted light in what Fletcher was beginning to recognize as amusement. Not at all, Captain. We have invited you to help us break the tie. The tie, Fletcher repeated flatly. Yes, Bob confirmed, her tendrils waving in agreement. After nearly 5 centuries of conflict, we are exactly where we started. Each side has won precisely 2,117 engagements and lost the same number. We have destroyed 17,132 Vraxian vessels, Steve added, and lost 17,832 of our own. The casualty ratio remains at precisely 1.1, Bob continued. even accounting for differences in crew complement and hierarchical value of lost personnel. Fletcher stared at them both, trying to determine if this was some elaborate joke. So, you've been fighting for nearly 5 centuries and achieved nothing. On the contrary, Steve objected, his crystalline structure vibrating in what might be indignation. We have maintained perfect adherence to the conventions of civilized warfare, demonstrating our species' sophistication and commitment to principles. Principles, Fletcher echoed, feeling a headache forming. Right. And what exactly do you want humans to do about this? Ty? Observe, Bob said simply. Witness our next major engagement. Your species has a reputation for unconventional thinking. Why invite humans if you don't want to end the war? Fletcher asked bluntly, the words escaping before he could apply diplomatic filters. A silence fell over the chamber, so profound that Fletcher could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Steve and Bob exchanged what might have been meaningful glances, hard to tell with a crystal and a shapeshifter. An interesting suggestion, Captain, Steve finally said, his voice carefully neutral. Indeed, Bob agreed, her tendrils writhing with what might be contemplation. Perhaps that is precisely why we requested humans. After all, Fletcher had the distinct feeling he'd just stepped into something much more complicated than he'd anticipated. Back in their temporary quarters, Reeves was elbow-deep in documentation, her eyes bloodshot from hours of reading. 47,000 pages, she groaned, pushing away from the console. That's how long their conventions of civilized warfare are. And that's just the abridged translation. Fletcher paced the room, unable to shake the sense of absurdity that had settled over him since the meeting. Tell me something useful. What are they really fighting over? The Kepler Nexus, Reeves said, pulling up a holographic map. It's a strategic choke point for interstellar travel. Whoever controls it has faster routes to about a dozen resource-rich systems. How much faster? About 3 weeks, standard time. 3 weeks? That's it! Fletcher stopped pacing. In a universe where travel between major systems can take months or years, they're fighting for 5 centuries over a 3-week shortcut? Reeves shrugged. Apparently, it's the principle of the thing. Principles, Fletcher muttered. Okay, what else? Economic value? Reeves called up another set of data, based on current galactic trade volumes and projected resource values. Control of the Nexus would represent an economic advantage of approximately 0.3% of their total trade economy. Fletcher stared at her. 0.3%. They've been at war for half a millennium over less than half a percentage point of economic advantage. When you put it that way, Reeves said with a grimace, it does seem a bit excessive. Show me their fleet deployments, Fletcher said, his mind working through possibilities. A new hologram appeared, showing the positions of both fleets around the Nexus. Thousands of ships arranged in elaborate formations that seemed more decorative than tactical. How many ships total? About 15,000 on each side, Reeves replied. Though only about a third are engaged in any given battle, the rest maintain formation and, well, wait their turn, essentially. Wait their turn, Fletcher repeated incredulously. And casualties? Approximately 0.05% annually. Fletcher did the mental math. So they're losing fewer ships than they can build in a year. This isn't a war. It's a galactic sport. With real lives at stake, Reeves pointed out. Minimal lives, Fletcher countered. If I'm reading this right, most ships are automated or minimally crewed. The actual sentient casualty rate is... what? A few dozen a year. Something like that, Reeves admitted. Most casualties are actually just captured and later exchanged according to Section 12 and 493 of the Conventions. Fletcher rubbed his temples. Okay, I need to talk to these ambassadors again, and I need to review Section C-12 of their precious conventions. Section C-12? Reeves looked puzzled. That's about alternative resolution methods. It's rarely invoked. Exactly, Fletcher said with a grim smile. It's time we helped them break this tie, human style. The next day found them back in the Grand Conciliation Chamber. But this time, Fletcher had rearranged the furniture. The grand table was gone, replaced by a simple tactical display showing both fleets and the Nexus. Captain, Steve greeted, his crystalline form catching the light differently today. Fletcher wondered if it was the equivalent of a wardrobe change. This is unconventional. Humans often are, Bob observed, her bioarmor rippling in what might be amusement. I've been reviewing your conflict, Fletcher said without preamble. And I have questions. We anticipated as much, Steve said. The conventions of civilized warfare can be quite complex for... Actually, Fletcher interrupted, my question is simpler. What's the point? Both ambassadors stared at him in what seemed to be confusion. The point, Bob's tendrils curled in on themselves. To determine who controls the Kepler Nexus. Of course. A strategic asset of considerable importance, Steve added. An asset worth 0.3% of your economic output. Fletcher countered. An asset that saves 3 weeks of travel time in a galaxy where travel is measured in months and years. Silence fell over the chamber again. You've been fighting for 473 years, Fletcher continued, and achieved perfect parity. Same number of victories, same number of losses, same number of casualties. You're not fighting a war. You're performing an elaborate dance. The conventions ensure fairness, Steve began, but his voice lacked conviction. The conventions ensure stalemate, Fletcher corrected. Which brings me back to my question. What's the real point? What do you actually want? More silence. Is it possible, Reeves suggested gently, that after all this time, the war itself has become the point? That the conflict has become a defining feature of both your civilizations? Bob's tendrils waved in agitation. Our species takes pride in our strategic acumen and martial tradition. As does ours, Steve agreed. Our youth trained from an early age to master the 173 accepted fleet formations. And how many of those formations have led to decisive victories? Fletcher asked. Neither ambassador answered. I thought so, Fletcher said. Here's what I propose. 1 decisive engagement. Equal forces. Human observers only. No interference. He paused. And we invoke subsection C-12 of your conventions. Alternative resolution methods? Steve's structure seemed to vibrate with alarm. But that's perfectly valid, Fletcher finished. And according to your own rules, it must be considered in good faith if proposed by a neutral third party. What alternative do you propose? Bob asked cautiously. Fletcher smiled. A time limit. 5 hours. 1 battle. And if there's no clear victor by the end, both sides agree to accept human mediation on terms of resolution. The ambassadors conferred in their native languages. Crystalline chimes from Steve, pulsing bioluminescent patterns from Bob. Finally, they turned back to Fletcher. We accept these terms, Steve said, though I must register formal objection to the time constraint. Traditional engagements can last for weeks. That's rather the point, Fletcher replied. 5 hours. Tomorrow. And may the best... whatever. Win. After the ambassadors departed, Reeves turned to Fletcher. 5 hours. Sir, with respect, these species have been fighting for centuries. What makes you think they'll achieve in 5 hours what they couldn't in 500 years? Fletcher's smile turned mysterious. Because, Lieutenant Commander, I have no intention of letting them fight the same way they have been. Sir, get me a secure channel to both fleets. I want to speak with their ship captains. Not the admirals, the actual captains. The ones who do the fighting. That's highly irregular, Reeves protested. Fleet doctrine in both cultures is strictly hierarchical. Exactly, Fletcher said. And that's why they've been stuck in this loop for centuries. Time to break the cycle. Hours later, Fletcher had spoken with a dozen captains from each side, carefully selected from those who had shown the most innovative tactics within the rigid confines of their doctrines. To each, he had posed the same question. If you could fight without the constraints of tradition, how would you do it? The answers had been illuminating. Now, on the day of the battle, Fletcher and Reeves stood in the observation deck of a small human shuttle, positioned at the midpoint between the fleets. The holographic displays showed the forces arrayed on either side, 5,000 ships each. As agreed. What did you tell them? Reeves asked quietly, as they watched the fleets arrange themselves in traditional formation. Nothing they didn't already know. Fletcher replied, I just encouraged them to think outside their crystalline and organic boxes. And the simulations? Your calculations were impeccable. As always, Fletcher said with a nod of approval. 4 hours is our window for decisive engagement. After that, mutual destruction becomes increasingly likely. And if this goes wrong? Reeves asked. Fletcher's expression sobered. Then, humans get the blame for turning a ceremonial war into a real one. But I don't think it will. Battle commences in 30 seconds, the shuttle's AI announced. On the displays, both fleets had arranged themselves in perfect mirror formations, like chessmen on a board, waiting for the first move. Here we go, Fletcher murmured. The first volleys were exchanged exactly as tradition dictated. Long-range energy weapons from the Zephyrians, bioorganic torpedoes from the Vraxians, each side taking precisely calculated shots at predetermined targets. Ships moving in choreographed patterns that were more ballet than battle. Fletcher checked the chronometer. 45 seconds in. This looks like every simulation of their previous engagements, Reeves commented, sounding disappointed. Wait for it, Fletcher said. At 47 seconds, it happened. 3 Vraxian cruisers suddenly broke formation, accelerating at speeds that should have been impossible for vessels their size. They charged directly toward the Zephyrian center, bioweapons hot. The Zephyrian line faltered, crystalline ships refracting light in patterns of apparent confusion. Then, to Fletcher's satisfaction, a squadron of smaller Zephyrian vessels broke their own formation, racing to intercept the Vraxian cruisers from an unexpected angle. What the hell? Reeves breathed, watching the displays as the carefully arranged formations on both sides began to dissolve. They're actually fighting, not just going through the motions. Humans aren't the only ones who can think outside the box, Fletcher said, unable to keep the satisfaction from his voice. We just have more practice at it. The battle that unfolded over the next few hours bore little resemblance to the ritualized exchanges of the past 473 years. The Zephyrians, freed from traditional constraints, revealed their crystalline ships could manipulate energy in ways their enemies had never seen, absorbing volleys, redirecting them, even amplifying them through precise, geometric formations that had nothing to do with the accepted fleet doctrines. The Vraxians, meanwhile, demonstrated that their bioorganic technology could adapt on the fly, vessels merging, desplitting, changing configuration in response to threats. What had appeared to be defensive armor revealed itself as offensive weaponry when deployed creatively. 2 hours in, Reeves reported, her fingers dancing across the tactical console. Casualties at 3% and climbing. They're fighting for real now. Fletcher nodded, his expression grim but determined. And innovation on both sides. Look at that Zephyrian maneuver. They're using the gravitation distortions from their engines to disrupt the Vraxian sensor arrays. And the Vraxians are countering with some kind of organic chaff, Reeves pointed out. Biological countermeasures I've never seen documented. By the 3-hour mark, the battle had transformed completely. Gone were the neat formations and ceremonial exchanges of fire. In their place was chaos. Productive, innovative chaos that saw both sides employing tactics they'd clearly been developing in secret for decades, perhaps centuries, but never dared to use. They were holding back, Fletcher realized aloud. All this time, their best minds were developing new tactics, new technologies, but tradition kept them from deploying them. Until someone gave them permission to break the rules, Reeves said with dawning understanding. You didn't tell them what to do. You just told them they could do something different. Sometimes that's all people need, Fletcher agreed. Permission to try another way. At 4 hours and 17 minutes, the battle reached its climax. Both fleets had taken significant losses. Nearly 15% of ships destroyed or disabled on each side. But they had also fought each other to a virtual standstill, with both commanding admirals deploying their final reserves in what looked like preparations for mutual annihilation. Time for Phase 2, Fletcher said grimly, reaching for the communications console. This is Captain Dylan Fletcher of the Terran Navy. By the power vested in me under subsection C-12 of the Conventions of Civilized Warfare, I am invoking the mediation clause. All hostilities will cease immediately. To his immense relief, both fleets responded, powering down weapon systems and ceasing their advance. Admirals and ambassadors of both fleets will convene on the Pax Concordia in 1 hour. Fletcher continued, prepare for resolution terms. When the communication ended, Reeves let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They actually stopped. I wasn't sure they would. They invited us for a reason, Fletcher reminded her. Deep down, I think they want this to end. They just needed a face-saving way to do it. And you're going to give them one? Fletcher smiled. Oh, I'm going to give them much more than that. The Grand Conciliation Chamber was packed to capacity. Not just the ambassadors this time, but the fleet admirals, the ship captains who had led the innovative attacks, and various other dignitaries from both sides. Fletcher stood at the center, with Reeves at his side, facing the assembled aliens with an expression of utmost seriousness. Today, you fought a battle unlike any in the 473-year history of your conflict, he began. For the first time, you fought not by rote, but with creativity, with passion, with true strategic thinking, and the result was another tie. Murmurs rippled through the gathering, some of protest, some of agreement. But this tie is different, Fletcher continued. This tie has shown you what you're truly capable of when freed from the constraints of tradition. And it has revealed something else, something I suspect many of you have known all along, but were afraid to acknowledge. He gestured, and Reeves activated a holographic display showing the Kepler Nexus and surrounding systems. The Kepler Nexus, Fletcher said, is not worth fighting over. Outrage erupted from several quarters, but Fletcher raised his hand for silence. Its strategic value is minimal, a 3-week saving in travel time. Its economic impact is negligible, 0.3% of your combined trade volumes. You have spent 5 centuries and countless resources fighting over an asset that, objectively speaking, isn't worth the cost of a single battle, let alone 4,234 of them. Silence fell over the chamber as his words sank in. But, Fletcher said, his voice softening, that doesn't mean there was no purpose to your conflict. For 473 years, your civilizations have defined themselves in opposition to each other. You have developed technologies, strategies, cultural identities around this war. Ending it means finding a new purpose. He nodded to Reeves, who changed the display to show a much wider view of the galaxy. In your single-minded focus on the nexus, both your species have neglected vast regions that are ideally suited to your unique characteristics, Fletcher continued. The Perseus arm contains 47 unclaimed systems, rich in the energy sources that Zephyrians thrive on. The outer spiral holds 31 worlds with biodiversity that would be a paradise for Vraxian development. The display zoomed in on these regions, highlighting resource concentrations and strategic positions. Fletcher could see the calculating looks in both delegations, the sudden realization of opportunities they'd been too fixated to notice. "We propose the following resolution," Fletcher said. First, the Kepler Nexus becomes a jointly administered neutral zone, with a research station replacing military installations. Second, both empires recognize the other's expansion rights in their ideal regions, with non-aggression pacts to formalize these boundaries. He paused, letting the proposals sink in. And third, most importantly, you both get to declare victory. Confusion rippled through the chamber. The Zephyrians, Fletcher explained, can rightfully claim they fought with honor and achieved their strategic goals of energy security and territorial integrity. Steve's crystalline form seemed to brighten at this framing. The Vraxians, Fletcher continued, can celebrate their successful defense of biological diversity and the securing of unprecedented resources for future generations. Bob's tendrils waved in what appeared to be thoughtful consideration. In short, Fletcher concluded, you both win, not by destroying each other, but by recognizing that your true interests lie in different directions. For a long moment, silence reigned in the chamber. Then, slowly, discussions broke out, first within delegations, then between them. Fletcher and Reeves stepped back, allowing the alien space to process the proposal. Hours later, after intense negotiations that refined the specifics of boundaries, governance structures, and resource-sharing accords, the unthinkable happened. Both ambassadors approached the center of the chamber. The Zephyrian Crystalline Collective, Steve announced formally, accepts these terms and declares the successful conclusion of our campaign to secure energy resources for our people. The Vraxian Biosynthetic Union, Bob stated with equal formality, accepts these terms and celebrates the triumphant defense of our biological sovereignty. Fletcher managed to keep his expression neutral. Despite the transparent fiction, both sides were embracing. Then, by the power vested in me under the conventions of civilized warfare, I declare this conflict officially resolved. The 473-year war is over. Applause, or the various species equivalents, filled the chamber. As the celebration continued, Reeves leaned close to Fletcher. 5 hours, she said quietly. You actually did it. We did it, Fletcher corrected. And they did it. All they needed was permission to think differently. And a face-saving way to stop fighting over something that didn't matter, Reeves added. Everything matters to someone, Fletcher replied philosophically. The trick is figuring out what matters more. 6 months later, Fletcher and Reeves stood on the observation deck of the newly commissioned Kepler research station, where once two hostile fleets had faced each other across the void. Now a thriving center of scientific cooperation orbited the Nexus. Reports from the Perseus arm indicate the Zephyrians have already made breakthroughs in crystalline energy storage, Reeves reported, scrolling through updates on her datapad. Their new technology could revolutionize power systems across the galaxy. And the Vraxians? Fletcher asked, gazing out at the stars. 3 new medical treatments derived from outer spiral biodiversity, Reeves said with a smile. One of which they're sharing with us as thanks for our mediation. Fletcher nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. So everyone genuinely wins, not just diplomatically, but practically. There's a lesson here, Reeves mused. Sometimes winning a war means not fighting it. Or at least not fighting it the way you always have. Fletcher agreed. Speaking of which, we've received a new assignment. The Vegas system dispute. Another war? Reeves asked. A territorial standoff. Only been going on for 2 centuries, though. So it's practically brand new. Reeves laughed. And how long do you think it will take us to solve this one? Fletcher pretended to consider. Well, we're getting better at this. I'd say, 3 hours, give or take. As they turned to leave, Fletcher cast one last look at the peaceful scene before them. The former battlefield, now a place of cooperation and progress. 500 years of conflict ended in 5 hours, not because humans were smarter or more powerful, but because sometimes all anyone needed was permission to try a different approach. It was a lesson he hoped would serve them well in the conflicts to come. The galaxy was full of ancient disputes, traditional enmities, and rigid thinking, but it was also full of possibilities for those willing to see them. 3 hours it is. Reeves agreed with a confident smile. Let's get to work. Captain Dylan Fletcher nodded, already planning his approach as they headed for their ship and the next challenge that awaited them among the stars.